I seem to be often looking for a place to hide, says her narrator, sometimes from the children, but more often from the jobs to be done and the phone ringing and the sociability of the neighborhood. I wanted to hide so that I could get busy at my real work, she wrote, which was a sort of wooing of distant parts of myself. For Munro, inner life is our real work. Those distant parts which her narrator wants to woo are like the pressure she needs to bring back her outline, her self-definition, her sense of reality. I'm no artist, but what I sometimes feel when I'm on social media is that pressure disappearing, just sort of floating away. I feel I'm losing touch with a sense of reality and self-definition. And I feel that although I have the illusion of being engaged, I'm just somehow not quite present. And although I'm giving the app my attention, it's a weird sort of half-baked attention. An artist I know and love here in Sydney, Michael Fitzjames, used to tell me he liked painting at midday when things, he said, were standing on their own shadow. I love that idea, and I sort of felt that when I'm on social media, I'm not quite standing on my own shadow. I have this feeling that the shadow is actually somewhere sort of over there. After I wrote the essay, I came across something another writer, James Salter, wrote and jotted it down because it sounded so similar to what Chekhov wrote. There are really two kinds of life, said Salter. There is the one people believe you are living, and there is the other. It's the other, he continued, which causes the trouble. The other we long to see. I think what Salter was getting at here was, like Chekhov, to do with creativity. The other life, the life that causes all the trouble, is the life of desire and creativity and invention and perhaps even a sort of radiance that may be connected to a kind of death awareness. We long to see it, but we lose track of it because part of us knows that it might get us into trouble, that it's in conflict with the necessary decorum of social life, of the life people believe you're living. But social media, I think, has done a lot to overturn this dichotomy. Today, it can seem like the life causing all the trouble is the life people believe you're living, the social life, the life they see you living online. And I think it can be that way for teenagers and even younger children who are pressured to present or perform versions of themselves online that can have very little to do with who they actually are. And this performative life often seems to get them into trouble. Of course, I really do believe that social media cuts two ways. It makes certain kinds of useful intimacy easier, and it can do a huge amount to bring people together. And that really shouldn't be underestimated. But I think it also seduces us into conflating a curated identity, if you like, with a real one. It encourages us to work on perfecting our style of curating rather than working on our actual selves. And you might ask, well, what's an actual, a real self? It's a big philosophical question, and I have no ready answer. But the other question, the implied one, is what is real? And I think that is important, because there are political as well as spiritual consequences if we can't agree, at least to some extent, on that. When our sense of our own and other people's reality is undermined, it becomes difficult not just to agree on basic facts, but to be able to read or understand human character. And then I think we really are in trouble. Right now, it feels like we're in a political moment, globally, I mean, that responds to the performance of absolute authority rather than to the more difficult task of responding to real situations and real human beings and the task of grasping their needs, their imperfections, their struggles. I don't think it's fair to blame Facebook or Snapchat or Twitter or any of these social media apps for all of this. But a consensus is growing, I think, that these companies, which have literally billions of users worldwide, are having a massive effect on our sense of reality, on the body politic, and on the way politics is conducted. Politicians aren't interested in your inner life, and neither are social media companies. In fact, the obscurity and unknowability of this part of us, the part Chekhov and Munro and Salter and so many other great writers we're talking about, the part that carries on at a night's leap's remove from opinions and politics and from the tailored ads that appear algorithmically in your inbox. This part of us is a nuisance to the social media companies. It impedes their software's ability to get to know us and thus our ability to use the software in the way they intend. And yet, of course, we want to use the software. The software knows how to make us want it. So we do what we must. We make available to the software a version of ourselves it can more easily work with. We reduce ourselves. We step away from our own shadow, if you like, in order to make it a more comfortable fit. We know, as Zadie Smith wrote when The Social Network, that movie, came out, that having 2,000 Facebook friends is not what it looks like. We know that we're using the software to behave in a certain superficial way toward others. But do we know, are we alert to what the software is doing to us? Is it possible that what is communicated between people online eventually becomes their truth? The Vietnam War actually provided a classic example of this insanity. Wars, it's been said, are about real estate. You take real estate away from the enemy, as one soldier put it, and then deny the enemy access to that real estate. In Vietnam, though, it didn't work like that. There was no front, and no ground was ever permanently won or lost. So how do you define success in such a war? That's what President Johnson was asking himself in 1966. By his orders, 385,000 US troops were in Vietnam, and within 2 years, the number would rise to more than 500,000. He and General Westmoreland, his commander in Vietnam, needed to show they were succeeding. They couldn't show gains in real estate or territory. They needed a different metric. And the metric they settled on, notoriously, was body count. Unfortunately, as a measure of success, this was the wrong metric. We know it was wrong, because although the numbers were always in the US's favor, US and South Vietnamese and Australian forces lost the war. But what's interesting to me is that the metric wasn't just wrong, it also had a distorting and corrosive effect on everything about the war, on the way it was fought and on how long it was fought for. For a metric to be useful, the first thing you need to know is that the numbers accurately reflect reality. But in Vietnam, making success a function of relative body count created an irresistible incentive to inflate and falsify the numbers, to push, as one former soldier put it, otherwise honorable men, warriors, to become liars. It created other perverse incentives too, to engage in battles which served no wider purpose, to use air power more indiscriminately, and to take less care to avoid killing non-combatants, including women and children. After all, quantitatively, one body is the same as another. The numbers clicked up regardless. Former US Army advisor James Wilbank summed up the situation with a sentence that I think reverts powerfully today and is the whole point of that long-seeming detour. He said, "If you can't count what's important, you make what you can count important." And this is a lesson I think we as a society don't appear to have learned. And in a multitude of different ways, we're paying the price. By quantifying phenomena that shouldn't be quantified, we're short-circuiting necessary discussions about what's important. Moreover, as in Vietnam, our over-reliance on metrics is creating perverse incentives. We're reducing complex, grown-up questions to infantile binaries and making smart, subtle, and honorable people more literal-minded and stupid. We're told the numbers don't lie, and we fall silent because who are we to disagree with something as objective as a quantity? But the numbers do lie. They lie all the time. They lie because of biases built into the way data is collected and analyzed, and they lie because instead of addressing the question of what's important, they inflate the importance of the things we can count for no other reason that we can count them. In many fields, metrics, as I said before, are incredibly important and useful. But in other fields, we use them mainly because it's easy. Numbers, unlike values, are things we can quickly agree on. That makes them feel efficient, reflexively falling back on things like polls, ratings, test results, and credit scores is a way to avoid getting bogged down in debates about values. It's a dramatic example to use, I know, but in many ways I think we as a society are flirting with the same game and creating similarly perverse incentives when we make so much hinge on likes and mentions on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram and so many other misleading metrics in the belief that any of it matters. It might not matter at all. Thank you very much.